Hi, this is Paul. And when I was on my travels, a number of people were complaining about not getting rando slots. And so I actually pre-signed up some folks. And I met Eric at Thunder Bay. And so yeah, so again, it's delightful. I had a good chance to talk to Eric at Thunder Bay. And so this is really fun to further the conversation. But for the sake of probably everyone else, Eric, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us who you are?
Hi, I'm Eric. Um, Live in Long Island. Been here my entire life. Um, Met Paul and everybody at Thunder Bay. That was a hell of a conference. That was truly amazing. I feel a little bit of longing for that. Um, yeah. So I mean, not much of a Christian background. My dad is born of both first generation German immigrants. They both just, they were just young enough to miss the war, but still have a bit of that in them. And the up until Peterson, I would say probably the most interaction I had with anything Christian was going to a Lutheran church for my confirmation, right? And being 13, that was scoffed at, right?
Hmm.
So
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 how did you find it was the Jordan Peterson pipeline?
yeah, I was asking around at the conference, so what brings you here? Because that was like the easiest way to start a conversation, and I feel like I fit the stereotype of everybody found Peterson, you know, and then they just kind of found their way to one of the three speakers, you know. I found Peterson pretty early on. I think I found him in 2016 with Bill C16. I remember at the time I had been listening to Crowder and that kind of group, and once Peterson kind of made the waves at the University of Toronto, I found him pretty early on. I remember watching some of the stuff that was happening at the university almost the same week that it was happening. So,
Okay. And what do you think grabbed you about all this?
oh, a lot of what grabbed everybody about Peterson, right?
Okay.
For 2016, that's when you're getting into, all media is fake. You end up. I think about the new atheist Christian apologetics argument, and that mimics a lot of the conversation everywhere else in the West, right? If you look at anywhere left right conversations, it's the same thing. It's like choreographed. I'm not actually talking to you. I'm talking to the points that you make, and I already have a set flow chart of how I'm going to react to that. You know, so I mean, I found Peterson and biblical series and all of that, and I mean, for 2 years, Peterson was pretty close to all I needed to accompany, occupy my time. Then there was Peugeot, and then I think Peugeot did a conversation with you, and then I found you. I'd say, and then you did a conversation with Vervaeke and Vervaeke. So now I've got the three of you in my little pocket here that I listen to. But I think I keep up with you the most. So
Okay.
um,
Well, why did you go to Thunder Bay?
I have one friend that I found after high school, but we both went to the same high school. Who intellectually and in terms of interests was we line up so neatly, and it was kind of coincidental because a lot of what we're interested in lines up with each other, and we found them from different angles, right? um, and once I found Peterson, and once I found you and Paul, you and Vervaeke and Peugeot, and it was not a lot of people in my life are willing to have that conversation. You know, it and then the second you bring a biblical series or Christian or anything like that, it's, oh well, you're one of those, and it's like, I'll entertain you for a 15-minute conversation, but I'm not. It's not going to be a conversation. I'm just going to let you
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah.
So I mean, my friend and I, he lives right now in Hawaii, He was at the event too. And talking with him is really the only person I have to talk about that stuff. So, I mean, you announced the Thunder Bay event. I think that was probably about a year ago, and I mean the renewed time.
Yep.
And he and I was like, "Hey, there's this event in Thunder Bay," and he's like, "Well, I want to go." You know, so it was, yeah, all right, I'll go if you'll go. You know, and
How did you guys fly there? Did you go to Minneapolis or did you go through Toronto or Vancouver?
So he's in Hawaii. So I flew from JFK to Toronto.
Okay.
He flew from Hawaii to Chicago to Toronto, and then we
Okay.
both took Toronto to Thunder Bay.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just
So,
curious.
yeah, I mean, the flight to Hawaii is, I mean,
Yeah.
I've done it myself. It is not fun.
No,
It is not fun.
it's a big, try going to Australia.
Oh my God. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, why? So obviously this has, can you do some thinking about why this has been important to you and how it's changed you?
So I grew up in New York, and a lot of the sentiment in America broadly is that the only place to live worse than California is New York. Um, if you're a conservative, at least, right?
Yeah, yeah. I've lived in
and
both places. That's mostly where I've lived.
So, I mean, I have in New York, it feels like the shift. We're not the Bible Belt, right?
No, no.
And my grandparents live in New Jersey. My grandfather, he worked on Wall Street a lot, working with stocks and that kind of thing. And you know, my up until probably graduating high school, probably right up until I found Peterson, my grandfather was my intellectual ideal, aspirational, you know, the role model, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he is the hardcore, dyed in the wool modernist, right? There is no definition for faith other than belief without evidence,
Wow.
right? Yeah. And for most of my life, right up until I found Peterson, and he starts asking these really hard to answer questions from that perspective, that was, you know, you're formed by these things before you become aware of them, right? So, I mean, I was like that way well into after high school, that kind of thing. So, you know, I went to Lutheran church for my confirmation, and that was wasted on me, right? Because this was a waste of my time. I'm sitting here, and it's like, you know, I'm I'm thinking of that last conversation that Peterson had with Peugeot and Mohammed Hijab, right? Did you get to finish that one?
I did. I finished it this morning.
Yeah, that was an
It
interesting thing to
ends,
watch.
right? It's like it
Oh
ends.
yeah. Oh
And
yeah.
so then I went to Daily Wire thinking, oh, maybe that's a teaser. There's more on Daily Wire. Nope.
Me too.
It just
No, cut
ends
dead.
right there.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole conversation was interesting. Watching Peugeot in that squirm in his seat, you know.
I thought he was going to go to the whole, you know, SOS high blink thing. Get me out of this. How did I get here?
Yeah, no, and so I mean, I'm thinking of him, and I'm thinking of the way that Mohammed Hijab, what a name, the way he represents the idea of original sin, right? It's someone that you never knew or have no real relationship to died after doing some horrible sin, and someone else that is in an equally distant saved you from it. And you know, so when I went to confirmation class, that's all I had in my head, and everything else. And you know, I have to say, people there, they were very, very kind. They were very accommodating, but it was all wasted on.
Yeah.
So I mean, Peterson rolls in, and in some ways, it was not Peterson chose me, but the conversation struck me and drew me in,
Hmm.
right? Because it felt like most of the life that I had had up until that point, and it's coupled with the fact that I was also young, was two dimensional, and he was starting to introduce the third dimension,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, and then you get into Peugeot and symbolism, and I probably listened to him for like a year and a half before any of it got through to me. And
Yeah.
but so this little corner of the internet, it's made my life had more color, made more depth, more um, that more of that ineffable aspect to it, right? Where it's like I'm no longer living in a flat world where people are characters and a cartoon, you know.
Hmm.
So and I mean, it's made my life better. Some ways not as much as I would like, but but it has made my relationships with others deeper. It's made my those that I can get to that depth with. Um, so I mean, yeah, it's part of what frustrates me is that it's so hard to get others interested in having that deeper connection, you know,
Yeah.
right? Like that meaning seeking.
Yep. It's interesting because this is in some ways the on-ramp conversation. I had a randos talk before you, a guy in New England, and and the on-ramp conversation is coming up more and more and more and more. And I mentioned to him, the video I released on Monday where I did a little commenting on Nathan Orman's conversation with John Vervaeke. I mean, our
Oh
critics
God, that was fun.
our critics bless us um in a often in an unintentional way when they tell us exactly how we're not communicating well, and and the
That was my
difficulty
thought. Yeah.
and the difficulty that part of the difficulty that we have is that in some ways this little community took off, and maybe it's sort of like one of these escaping Vietnam or Afghanistan scenes where you've got this plane taking off, you got latecomers running and trying to grab on and get in,
Holding onto
open
the
the
wheel
door,
well.
let me in. And the difficulty is that we're a moving target. And even, I mean, Thunder Bay changed, which was the intention. Thunder Bay changed this little corner partly because it was a moment and a place when we were all on the ground at the same time, and we
Mm-hmm.
all had a shared experience, and we saw each other face to face. And videos can change things too, but and the difficulty is that we're all sort of changing, and we're changing each other, and that's all going on at the same time, kind of in an enclosed space.
Yeah, and like a
And
bubble.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're in a bubble. And as I said there with the panel when we had all of us on stage, this is in some ways part of the problem that the church has had for a very long time. And so those who, let's say, fell off the wagon or the rail car 2 or 3 generations past, how to get back on it. This is a perpetual challenge that the church has, but it's and so there's now at least 3 people after my Randall's conversations, which will be shared. 3 people who are basically saying, we really need to. I'm going to call it the onboarding problem or the on ramp problem. We really need to address this problem because people have friends and they want to invite their friends into the conversation. And well, here's a few thousand hours of video that you need to
Oh yeah.
watch in order to get up to speed. That's not going to work.
No, I invited a couple of. I still have another really close friend that I would have invited, and my girlfriend I would have invited to come to Thunder Bay with us. But the sentiment was generally, I wouldn't know what I was doing there.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like that's all over my head and everything. And the fact that it makes it another thing that's another challenge is the fact that we don't focus on the propositional statements. right? The propositional is almost an afterthought. And for something like that, it's like, okay, so the propositions change every 6 months that come from this corner. And so when someone like what is it, Digital Gnosis starts calling people out on that, it's like, well, you never actually just state it. And it's like that it's not the point. um so yeah, there is I remember there was a sentiment too at the event was, okay, how would we be able to make this a bigger thing? And I wonder about that because there's a fractal aspect of it. It's like, how do we invite more people into the conversation? But it's also like, I question myself. It's like, how do I invite other people into my life like that?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not easy. It's like, because I mean, if you go to some other communities, they can give you like pamphlets on this stuff, right? They can give you like another thing. I was thinking about that conversation with Muhammad Hijab and them. It was it felt like throughout the conversation he had all these little paxi sects of sayings and topics to talk about where he's selling you his community, right? And I mean, Peugeot was not happy with that, but
Well, it was so, I thought it was so helpful if, let's say an evangelical would watch that and realize you are the Muslim.
oh yeah,
I mean,
oh yeah,
when you do your little tricks, you're the Muslim. And if you find what he's doing offensive, well, that's how everyone else is finding you.
yeah, because it felt like the entire conversation he had an end point in mind, and
Peugeot
everything
reaches
he
over,
said
he's
was
trying to convert you to Islam. So the most hilarious moment in the whole conversation, right at the end.
and I don't know if Peterson realized, right? I think he was giving too much of the benefit of the doubt, or he was just choosing not to acknowledge it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because it was, I can only imagine the conversation that the two of them had afterward, where it was like, why did you bring me to this? um, but that's there's an approach to a conversation that is shared, like, because I mean, he did it with his community, and the evangelicals do that with theirs. And I mean, Jesus, if you go to the door-to-door Jehovah's Witnesses or the Latter-day Saints, that kind of thing. But even conservatives do that. The left do that.
Yep, yep,
It
yep.
is the norm for all of, I feel, at least America's culture, is if you're going to be connecting to anything bigger than your individual subjective personal life, it's, well, we talk in little packets and we just pass them back and forth. And I mean, the new atheist argument debates are like that. That's, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of it. I had a conversation. I think his name was Osef. He was an Israeli that lived in Toronto at the event, and he was like, "I'm a bartender, and that's the only conversation we have is that."
Hmm.
So it's, and I don't know how you would go about working on that problem other than simply changing who you are, right? There's no propositional aid to that problem.
Hmm.
So I mean, in some ways it can be a little despairing, where it's like, I mean, I told you about my grandfather. He's, if you don't have a proposition, and the conversation is useless,
Yeah.
right?
Well, your point about the propositions is really important. And I mean, one of the aspects of modernism is it oversold the propositions. It said all that matters are the propositions, and if we can rearrange the propositions, then we can achieve a very non-propositional participatory, if we can procedurally arrange the participatory, we can achieve a perspectival utopia, and propositions are insufficient to do that. And part of the transition away from modernism that we're seeing is the recognition that it is a failed project. Now, not everyone is aware that it's failed, because for the most part, our politics and a lot of our political discourse remains focused on the propositional. But the truth is, the propositional is, at least if you got Vervaeke's 4, I mean, it's at least a quarter of everything, and so it's not
Yeah, you
going
can't do it
away.
without it.
Right. And if this little corner of the internet was known for giving $1,000 to newcomers, well, you know, that suddenly would be, oh, $1,000, that's very proposition, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Now, if it said, yeah, we'll give you $1,000, but we need 1,000 hours of your life, they'd say, no, $1 an hour is not good enough. So it's, yeah, the on-ramp challenge is a real challenge, and we have to be careful about exactly what you just said I'm sick of, which is that it becomes another it becomes sort of another thing that Muhammad Hijab, again, what a name. I almost wonder, you know, did you choose that name? Because
Oh God.
if that's the name you chose, I mean, it's just like, well, yeah, we're gonna be confrontational right away, because at least in a very low resolution Western perspective, if there's 2 words, you know, there's 2 words people know.
No, that was a name that belonged in the movie Team America. You know,
Yeah,
like that. I was like, that's an unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. I mean, for him, I imagine that it's a thing of pride, but geez, you know.
The only thing worse would be Muhammad Hijab. I mean, you know, it's just basically the. Anyway, I won't go there.
Yeah. So I mean, I think about you made a comment once that it was like people approach this conversation with the how will this get me to what I want?
Yeah.
Right. And it's not necessarily like this personal what do I want, but it's what I think is important. Right. So if you talk to a conservative, the general tone to the conversation on their end is going to be, how is this going to beat the woke? Right. And it's like, well, it's not going to do that. It's going to change what you think is important.
Right.
And a lot of people that's what's important is already settled.
Right.
You know?
That's the goal. My goal is, unless you start asking them about it, and you know, to try to up the resolution on what they want.
Yeah, and then they realize that they have no idea that what they think is important. It's just this general, we're going to beat the woke, we're going to get them out of our schools, and then what? I don't know. Then you can do what you want again. You know.
The people I know who more radically and exhaustively do what they want are the homeless. I had that realization once when talking to, you know, one of my friends here, and he doesn't open mail, he doesn't pay bills, he doesn't worry about going to work. You know, in some ways it's a strange application of Jesus, you know, care not about what you will eat and what you will drink, because they live like the birds of the air, off the generosity of strangers or the dumpster of the Smart and Final supermarket next to the church. But they, you know, I was one day sitting and talking to one of these guys, and I realized part of the reason he lives like this is he has almost no obligations in his life. All of the obligations that we assume, paying the bills, you know, taking out the garbage, all of this stuff, he does what he wants when he wants. The only challenge that he has is this agency thing in terms of the range of what he actually can do. You know, I can drive from here to Tahoe to look at beautiful Lake Tahoe if I want to. He can't, because he doesn't have a car.
Within a couple of blocks.
Right. Maybe he can get on the bus if he scrounges up some bus fare. And the thing is, what he mostly wants, at least at that point, he's off the streets now, which is a good thing. What he mostly wanted to do back in those days was just make sure he had enough alcohol in him to never feel sober. that was always what he'd say. He'd say, I can't, I can't feel sober. If I need to keep the alcohol at a certain level all the time. To wake up
Yeah.
sober is terror. So anyway.
Yeah. It reminds me of Peterson's comment in the biblical series of like, talking about how eating the fruit gave us consciousness, and the answer isn't to go back to sleep. It's way more consciousness, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So
Sometimes I look at there's because I have a couple of homeless people in my town. We used to have a massive psychiatric center by us,
oh,
and they shut down in the 90s, and we're still dealing with the kind of residual people who were left to pick up the pieces after that. And I look at them, and sometimes I'm like, it's a marvel that any human being can work at all, you know. And it's a marvel that they're capable of functioning to the degree that they do, given
yes.
what they put in themselves.
Yes. I think this all the time. I look at these guys, I know these guys. I look at one guy, he's a meth addict. He got kicked out of his house by his wife. He he has for the last 4 years now. He told me I bumped it because I know where he panhandles, and I talked to him, and he told me that he's now in a place, but the dude literally lived outside, exposed to the elements for 4 years.
We're more adaptive than we think.
Oh, and then one guy from my church once told me, because he had a rough growing up. He said, "Did you ever notice that the homeless don't seem to have problems with baldness?" Because he and I are both bald. And yesterday there's this, somebody made a comment on the internet about my fence and the homeless, and it's like I still got plenty of homeless stuff. So right over here on the other side of the fence, right by my office, there's the fire bug. Part of the reason we built the fence was the fire bug kept lighting fires against the church building. It's like, dude, you're gonna burn down the church. So now he lights his little fires just out there on the sidewalk and on the steps to the church. But yesterday I was going into my office and he was there, and he's usually got a hat on. He's all covered up. The dude's in his probably 70s, pulled off his hair. Beautiful hair, it's not gray or anything, just this whole head full of hair. And I just think, and a lot of the other homeless guys I know too, they've just got great hair. And I think maybe living inside hurts our hair.
There you go, Paul. If you're really that concerned about it, maybe you should just go live among them for a year.
Right? It's my new bald treatment is become homeless. Drink lots of alcohol, do a fair amount of pot. Eat out of the Smart and Final dumpster, sleep next to living stones outside, and my hair will return.
You start a new channel. Now, not bald, Paul Vandercliff. Yeah.
Well,
Did you
anyway,
find that after the event, because I know you did a bunch of traveling over the summer, did you
yeah,
find that things unraveled a little bit while you were gone, or
things
did you
always
have to
unravel when I'm
wrangle?
away. Not
Did
too
you have a
bad this
lot to
time.
wrangle?
What's that?
Did you have a lot to wrangle, or?
Well, we had the fence up before I left.
Mm.
That helped because the fence sort of keeps some of the chaos at bay. And then we had to repair a wall in back because when we built the fence, people started taking down a particular wall. And so then we had to reinforce the wall and make it so it wasn't easy to take that apart. And
It's like The
since
Walking Dead.
well, that's, I'm driving back with my wife we took a little drive last weekend just to get out of town, and we're driving back into town, and that's what we said. I mean, it's like zombies on the street here. There's just shufflers, and they're just ambling around. Now, fortunately, they're not eating brains to the best of our knowledge, but they're just ambling around. And it's like The Walking Dead in some ways. But no, the fence helped. We had some break-ins. I had to clean a guy out of a classroom that broke into a classroom and started living in it. The part of the problem is that if I'm here at the site every day, and so I keep an eye on everything. And if I'm
Mhm.
not here every day, people watch, and people who are looking for some better upgrade in terms of where to live or what to get or all of that stuff, people notice that there's no longer a car coming in. They no longer see me picking up trash, then they get all the places. I had, in fact, had one person once tell me, this is an abandoned church. And I thought, no, it looks that way sometimes, but it really isn't. So
Yeah, sometimes when you talk about your church, it might be someday, but not yet.
not yet, not yet. No, the truth is, part of my goal is to keep this from becoming a Taco Bell, because if the church goes belly up, there will be, we were fortunate in that we were fairly early in terms of the development of this area. And so we have a great spot. And if the church would go belly up, there are lines of developers that will be right here, but what they'll put here is a Taco Bell, as if what our neighborhood really needs more of is fast food. But
Yeah.
so no, so getting back was actually for me, the transformation was a little harder for me because I had to switch gears, because and I think it's a very healthy thing for my soul. I had to get back in touch with the needs of the members, the life of the homeless, the rhythms of being a pastor in a local church, rather than a thinky talky celebrity on stage that takes selfies with randos. And there's nothing wrong with that, and I want there to continue to be more events, because I think the kinds of events like Thunder Bay are actually vital for the on-ramp problem for this little corner of the internet. They're vital for the continued development of the community. But for me personally, I just had a pastor's lunch yesterday with a bunch of colleagues, and I'm trying not to have this online life, or maybe the tour life, become my whole life. And
Mm.
that has happened to Jordan, and his work suffers for it, because part of what made especially his classroom lectures and those early lectures fresh was he had to deal with college students in person, not as a
Yeah.
celebrity. He was a clinical psychologist. He was sitting in a little room with a really hurting, struggling person, working with them in their struggles to try and help them do better. That kind of local discipline is super instructive, and is actually what gave a lot of his lectures power, because my favorite things was when he could take a lot of these heady ideas and break it down through the filter of his clinical practice. And he had to explain these things to drowsy college students that are there. They're not quite sure why. They're probably drinking too much and having too much sex and having too much pot and playing too many computer games. And he still got to try to communicate to them. That is a really helpful discipline. And when
Yeah.
suddenly now you become a celebrity and you're on tour, now I got to be careful, because by virtue of what's happening here, that might become my life. Just I've got 8 years until retirement, and I don't know if Living Stone's got another 8 years in it. So and this obviously is vital ministry, and it's really good stuff, but I just find that there's something really healthy and foundational about keeping your feet on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it said that becoming a master in the field makes it difficult to teach because you forget what others don't know,
Right.
right? And I wonder if part of the problem that we have, that we were just talking about, the quality of conversation in America or in the West in general, is a result of everybody becoming a silo. Because I mean, you eventually just you get so big that you can only associate with 10 or so people on a daily basis, and then you pigeonhole yourself, right? And that works fine if all you're going to do is your 3 minute segment on Fox News or CNN, because that's all you need, is to be able to talk to 10 people, because you're talking to one person every once in a while. But that's part of the growing disconnect between the the people talking in the upper echelons of society and everyone else.
Right. So then
And
you have to increasingly wall yourself away from the randomness of the world. You
mm-hmm.
no longer pump gas. You no longer buy groceries. You no longer have to deal with a panhandler. You no longer even have to get on public transportation, even just air travel. You're
Yeah, the
flying in a
world has
public
to
jet.
become less and less resolution, right? It has to become
Right,
more and more of a thumbnail.
right, right.
And I mean, because 10 years ago, if you wanted to talk to Peterson, you send him an email.
Yeah,
Now, if you want to talk to Peterson, you have to be, what, 1 million subscribers.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
then maybe you'll be able to have a talk in a year, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. And so and the truth is that there are many, many smart, interesting people out there that there are no lines to talk to them. You just have a finding problem.
yeah.
And what was really cool about Thunder Bay, the German festival, the Dutch event that we had, and a number of the events in the UK was there. You bump into a lot of really interesting people in these events, and now part of what happens with famous people is they get their little, Peterson, you talk about a stand-up comic. The way a stand-up comic gets, if you watch Ms. Maisel, gets, let's say, their tight 10. They have all these different little segments that have all been sort of purified out from all of these things. It's sort of like, I mean, a stand-up comic sort of is like a greatest hits album, but you've never heard any of their other music. And so it's just bang, 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 and everybody has a good time. What happens is when you're on stage, you sort of naturally do that. You get all of these talking points, and that's fine. The overall culture benefits from that sort of distillation.
Mm-hmm.
The truth is that out there in the world, there are many people with brilliance. The difficulty is we don't all know quite where that brilliance is at. And so it's sort of, I mean, a number of years ago, I used to watch all like the gold rush and the gold mining programs that were on Discovery. I mean, you're moving yards and yards and yards of human consciousness just to, get out the gold nuggets. And you decimate a landscape and you wind up with a little jar of gold that's all these little fine flecks because you've run it through a wash plant. And in some ways, part of what we're always doing is sort of sifting in order to get at the gold. But as you said, we don't even know what the gold is. And
Yeah,
so
yep.
it's moving both ways.
Yeah. And, so I mean, yeah, we don't know what the gold is, definitely, because I still get the sense that your average American would listen to John Vervaeke and not recognize the relevance of what he's saying,
No, yeah,
right?
no.
And I mean, when I try to have these conversations, there's a couple of people, especially if they're older than me, that will get annoyed with the confidence with which I will say certain things that I've learned, right? And it's like, you spend enough time listening to Vervaeke and Peugeot and Peterson and you, and there are some things that you can say with a degree of confidence, right? Faith is not simply belief without evidence,
Yeah.
right? Right. What it is, you can spend a lot of time talking about that, but you can say wholesale that does not capture it, right?
Yeah.
And I've noticed if the person is over 50, 55, the fact that I will refute that with, or the fact that I will take that and say, well, that just simply doesn't explain it, is frustrating to them because I'm supposed to take their word for it because they're older, you
Yeah.
know. And it's like
Yeah.
this is the set understanding of what our culture labels these things, and the fact that you question it, and the fact that you question it is a result of your arrogance and ego,
Yeah.
then rather than so. I mean, um, there's a questioning of what words mean. There's a questioning of what's actually happening now that, depending on who you're talking to, is not going to be met very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Um, I see that a little bit. And I liked your video on digital gnosis, and that conversation that Nathan had with Vervaeke was interesting. And then going and listening to his hit, like I don't know what to call that other than a hit piece on you, right? What did he call you? The pseudo profound drivel or something like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like that's someone who I think by and large is complaining that the conversation isn't going the way that it has always been for the last 30 years or so,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
if it was a hit piece, it didn't hurt very much. So that wasn't, and part of it is that as a pastor, if you're a pastor and you haven't developed thick skin, you're not going to last in this profession. I mean, it's just part of the way this is. So, but yeah, yeah. So I don't know. I've been pestering you, and we don't have too much time left. I don't know if you have any things that you wanted to cover or talk about that. Um,
uh, no, I mean there's a lot going on. I've been thinking about when my friend comes back from Hawaii because he's in the military right now and his time's about to run up. Starting an estuary over on this side. I don't know what the sort of demand would be on Long Island. That'd be interesting to look into.
yeah.
Because I leaving Thunder Bay, there was a my girlfriend said there was a glowingness to me, right? That it was like, yeah, come home, and the way I talked about it, she was like, it's like you found your home and you just left it, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was somewhat disappointing that life went back to normal after that,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Um, so there's a
Well,
starting an estuary
so
over here
so
would be good.
so what do you think Thunder Bay did for you?
It gave me a better sense of what it is I am looking for in my relationship with others,
Okay.
right? Um, yeah, it gave me a better sense of what I was looking, because the content, right? There was a comment Vervaeke made in his conversation with Peugeot, I think, where he said, the matter of the conversation is less important than the manner of the conversation, right? So, I mean, while we were there, I felt like while I was paying attention to the ideas and what was being said, I was getting a little wrapped up in the spirit of the conversation being had. And a lot of the content is something that, in watching the videos afterward back at home, is something that I can better focus on and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it really felt like the purpose of that event was not to get to some sort of conclusion, or it was just to have the conversation that could be had forever, you know. And I get that sense sometimes, especially if you listen to John and Jonathan talk. It's like they could probably keep on talking until the stars collapse, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, so I mean, I felt like I walked away with a better sense of what it was I wanted to accumulate and develop in my own life, right? There was something. I don't want to use the word divine because that sounds a little melodramatic, but there was something incredibly special that was had there. Um,
Yeah. That was I don't know. I just at 10 o'clock Sacramento time, I posted a conversation that Jacob did with Catherine and Eamon and
I saw
Father
that, yeah.
Eric. Okay. And I thought that was a really good conversation on just getting a sense of, sort of doing okay, what the takeaways and a postmortem, and now what? Um, and it's, yeah, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, Long Island. So I grew up in New Jersey, in Paterson.
My grandparents are in Jersey right now, Marlboro, if you know. Yeah.
Okay. So, and I had an uncle who lived in West Sayville. My grandfather actually pastored a church in West Sayville for a while.
Mhm.
And the difficult thing about Long Island is, in order to get to it or get from it, you have to go through New York.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
might not know what that means, but um, we love having cities on islands because of course, waterways are incredibly vital for moving lots of things. But in terms of getting to and from places in cars, New York is one big obstacle. And so,
Yeah. There's like only two or three bridges from Long Island to anywhere else.
yep,
And,
yep.
there's a common comment where it's like, if we ever get attacked or anything, Long Island is just going to be a giant waiting room to get off, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
I mean,
true.
to get any long distance travelers, that I can see the difficulty in that.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, because the guy I just talked to before you, he really wants to get something going in New England, which geographically is not far from you, but there's a body of water separating
yeah,
you from
it's
Connecticut.
hours. Yeah.
Oh, no, I thought Thunder Bay, it was a really special time, and it'll be interesting to see. I mean, a lot of life for human beings is sort of leaned forward, looking at, anticipating, expecting, hoping, wishing what comes next. And I think Thunder Bay sort of distilled a bunch of things and gave people a vision for, okay, this can be had, this can be done. Um, but the questions are, and okay, how does this change me? How does this change me for the better? How does this maybe, and I think you articulated well, how does it make me want something better? Because that's
Hmm.
part of it too. Part of it is I see the possibility of something better, but I have a better target that I am shooting for. And unless something is sort of changing your target, it's probably not helping you very much. And I think the conference for a lot of people was um, giving them a sense of, um, yeah, this can we can not only improve how we talk to one another or relate to one another, but we can also begin to improve what we want, and we can start to want for better things. And so
Yeah.
yeah,
The Peugeot at the end of the conference, Catherine had all the four of you up on the stage, and the four questions of, like, points of agreement, that kind of thing. And Peugeot, he's like, "Well, I don't have any new questions. I mean, this conversation is just it's a conversation that just keeps on going, right? There's a
yeah,
narrowing. I think Jung called it circumambulation, where you just go spiraling around it, and you just get closer. You don't ever touch it.
yeah,
And I feel like he let it slip, or he feels like he let it slip, where he was like, now here at the end of Western civilization, and he's like, oh, at the end of things, we'll leave it at that. Um, he's like, I'm starting to see the glimpses of the world that comes after,
yeah,
and and that I feel the same way in some ways. Like that resonated with me, the way he said that. And then they talk about the Kairos moment isn't something that you manufacture; it's something you participate in. So in
yeah,
a lot of this feels like we're just waiting, and it's a painful waiting sometimes.
yeah,
Um, you do your due diligence, but the bigger shifts come from above.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. No, that's right. That's right. Well, good. Any final things before we land the plane here?
I'm looking forward to your commentary on the last couple of conversations. There have been a lot of really good ones
So
that,
what ones would you recommend that I pay more attention to? Because
well, maybe a
the
couple of
first half of the hijab one I found kind of a throwaway. The second half got a lot more interesting.
I think it took like 20 minutes before Peugeot even opened his mouth.
Yeah,
I found that alone was interesting.
yeah,
Um, the second half of that could be good. Maybe a little bit more of a focused content focus of the speakers at the event. I think that there was
mm,
there's a lot of gold in that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Peugeot's talk, like everybody was saying, like that was the best talk that he had given.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to Peterson's biblical series. The next one's going to be really good, or at least I hope.
Yeah, we'll see. It's that he set it up to be very different from the first one. I mean, the first one was him on stage. Obviously, he had thought about this material for a very long time.
Mhm.
15 sessions, in front of a live audience. That was sort of a precursor to his what has become his tours. They're not really book tours; they're just sort of tours. But the second one,
He's
I don't know
invited
how he's
help.
going to set it up. What's
I know
that?
that he's invited more help with the second series.
Well,
Um,
he invited all these guys down to Florida and they spent 10 days together and they went through the first half of the book of Exodus. So how much video will that be? I mean, we've seen that the Peugeot Hurwitz video came out of there.
mhm.
There was another video that pretty clearly came out of there. So yeah, it'll be interesting. And
It
the
feels like
biblical,
Jordan found his step again.
I think he has. I think he has regained a lot of his footing. Um, I'm not quite sure what that whole Muhammad hijab video was. He seemed to be in a mosque and
Yeah,
the
he was.
cutoff. So I don't know. I'm anxious to ask Jonathan what happened after that cutoff. The cutoff was very strange.
I
Um,
looked up Muhammad Hijab, and I know he had done a conversation. So that was the second time he had talked to Peterson.
right. I'd seen the first one, which wasn't particularly good either.
I didn't watch it, but I didn't imagine that it would be. Um, I feel bad because it's kind of like how we treat Sam Harris, where we're just kind of crapping all over them.
Well, I
um,
don't think hijab is a good partner for Peterson to talk about Islam.
no, no, there were some questions because I mean Peterson the whole time through, he's like, all right, why do the Muslims accept Christ as an important figure? And it was just he went through the spiel of like it felt like he had a paxi answer and it was him selling. Oh well, you can keep your Christ, we just have to make him not the Son of God,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it just oh
Will
geez.
you or will you not accept Muhammad as the definitive prophet? It's like, oh, Peterson, no. Why? That's not how I work. Which was actually a pretty good answer because, anyway. Um,
Yeah. Well, well, I mean, there's a lot of content to cover. It does feel like there's going to be some good things coming up. I'm looking forward to After Socrates with John
yeah,
Vervaeke.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
going to be good. Um, Peugeot is in a weird limbo where he's just the little angel on the right shoulder of Jordan Peterson lately. You know,
yeah,
he's like the conversational bodyguard for him lately. It's
yeah,
it's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. I think I hope Jonathan can find some time to do more Jonathan stuff rather than adjunct Peterson stuff. Um, Fairy tale stuff. God's Dog, I think, was a pretty big accomplishment for him. And
Yeah,
it'll be
my only
interesting.
complaint was that it was too short.
Yeah. Well, Peugeot is, John and Jordan and I are all about the same age, and Jonathan's about 10 years younger. So, um, it'll be, he's got some more potential in him just by virtue of age, quite likely. So
The well hasn't dried up yet.
no, that's right. The cake isn't quite as baked. So anyway.
Well,
All right, Eric. It was good. It was good seeing your face again after the conference.
likewise. Thank you, Paul.
And
This is nice. It's been nice. You're very tall in person.
well, you're not very short either.
No, no. I was amazed. You were like a half an inch taller than me, and people. I took a picture with you, and I showed them. He's like, "Oh my god, he's tall."
He doesn't look very tall on YouTube. He's just sitting in that office. And
Yeah.
now, if I have the camera, like this, everybody will think I'm real tall.
Yeah. Well. So, well, thank you, Paul.
All right, Eric. You take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You too.